Hello and welcome to Cookery with Mason Storm. On today's episode we're going to look at making some French onion soup. And this is not going to be the overcomplicated version of it. This is going to be the version for mere mortals. So stay tuned to see how it's done. Our ingredients consist of 2 cloves of garlic, 1/4 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of butter, 1/4 cup of olive oil, 5 onions, and 1 liter of beef broth. And to begin our process, we get our cutting board out and our onions. Now this is kind of the key to making French onion soup is onions. So I simply cut them in half after peeling them, take the tops off because they're kind of gross, and then just simply slice the onions into slices, which is quite simple and quite easy to do. And the way I cross cut it there, you got the root to hold on, so depending on your onion type it may work better or worse than mine, but either way, just keep slicing and eventually you'll be able to convert all of your onions into nice onion slices, which is the perfect thing for making French onion soup. They're all going to be cooked down to mush anyway, so nice small pieces makes it a lot quicker. And once we're done cutting all of our onions up, it's time to focus on the other thing we have to cut up, which is our garlic. And I've already peeled the garlic, so I just smash it with the back side of the knife and cut it into nice small pieces, doing the multi-pass. And once we're done with our garlic, it's time to go over to our stove top. Get yourself a nice big pot. We'll go for kind of a medium-high heat here, and then we'll add in our butter and our oil into the bottom of the pan. And you can let this melt if you want, but I'm not going to really bother. And I'll just toss in all the onions in. And then we play the simple game of cooking down the onions. Make sure you got your fan on so it doesn't stink everything up. And just keep stirring it occasionally. And we're going to cook this down for about the next, half hour or so. Don't worry, I'll speed it up a little bit. So this process is known as caramelizing the onions. We're cooking down the moisture in them, and we're refining the sugars inside of the onions themselves. And it kind of creates this sweetness. These onions are very sweet now. And once our caramelization phase hits its apex, or they start really having a lot of color, we add in our flour, and then we add in our garlic. You don't want to add your garlic in too early or else you'll burn it. And we want to cook it now for another 4 minutes or so. And that's going to get rid of the flour taste and allow the flour to soak up some of that caramelized sugar and really draw out the flavor in the onions, which is just fantastic. I really like to keep my onions moving during this phase now that I have the flour with them, because the flour can technically burn. And I'm using my wooden spoon here too to kind of scrape the bottom of the pan. We don't want anything kind of left behind. And we're just going to keep stirring stuff around, watching that clock, waiting for our several minutes to pass by. But once it does, then we can add in our beef broth. Then once we add in our beef broth, we're going to give it a little bit of a stir. Then we're going to drop the temperature down on the stove top to minimum low settings. So it's just going to kind of simmer a little bit. We'll throw a lid partially over the pot. I don't have the right size, so this one kind of works good for me. And then we're just going to leave it for about half an hour or so. And here we are in the future. Just going to pop the lid off. Going to give it a bit of a stir. Get the spoon and try it. Maybe add a little bit of salt and pepper or some other seasonings if you want. Either way, the soup tastes good to me, so I'm going to move on to the next step. I should probably mention that if your soup is too thick, you can add more stock to it. And if it's too thin, you can let it boil down a little bit more and it'll kind of concentrate. So a lot of ways you can kind of fine tune this if it's not quite to the way that you want it. I personally like a real strong onion soup. So French onion soup goes really good with stale bread, and I just happen to have a real stale baguette here and I'm going to be using it. So I'm just going to cut it out into some slices. Now, a lot of times what you want to do is you want to cut your baguette into slices and then toast them and then use them to make the soup proper. But this stuff is incredibly stale and I don't think it's necessary to toast it, so I'm not going to bother. Now, as far as your placement of your toast, you can either put it in the bottom and then pour your soup on top of it, or you can do the thing where you pour your soup and then put it on top, or you can double down and have bread on the bottom, pour soup on top, and put bread on top of that. And that's probably the most elegant way to do it. Now, I don't know where my actual French onion soup bowls went, so I have to use this thing. And I'm going to do the bottom method. So I'm just going to lay out some of these pieces of incredibly stale bread in the bottom of this bowl here. And I'm going to get my thing of soup once I have them all laid out in the way that I think is most proper and defined, and simply pour the soup on top of the bread, which is quite simple and quite easy to do, and very effective, I should add. And just kind of ladling it on nice and thick. And we want to make sure we have lots of onion pieces in there and you're not just skimming the top, because that will give you a bad experience, or should I say less than ideal. And once we got all of our soup in there, I'm simply going to grate some mozzarella cheese on the top before sticking in the oven under the broiler. And the broiler will simply melt all the cheese and kind of cook it down a little bit, maybe toast the bread. So the broiler function on the oven works great for making your French onion soup. The only downside is that it makes your bowl incredibly hot, so if you touch your bowl, it can be a little bit unpleasant. Well, actually, you burn yourself. That's very unpleasant. It's always good to have a splash pan underneath your soup when you have it in the oven, especially when you're using an unregulated French onion soup bowl. And we're just going to cook that for a couple minutes till we get that color we want, and then it's done. And this is how I make my French onion soup. So let me know in the comments below if you make it the same way I do, or if you want to try this recipe and make it and tell me what you think about it. And if you like my content and would like to see more of it, please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay awesome.